Hello my book loving friends, and welcome back to Storytime with Mary. This, book lovers, is where we get to read all of our favourite books. And book lovers, if you're loving reading along with Mary, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our videos. And book lovers, we can read together all the time. Okay, so we are continuing on our journey to read the fairy tales of Alberton Forest. This book is written by Lorraine Bernier. We've already read the first 2 chapters of this book, but today we are skipping to chapter 4 because it's so cool. Chapter 4 is called Applelena Blossom and Her Flute. Book lovers, if you've got this book at home, grab it now and let's read chapter 4 together. And while you're grabbing your book, I want to tell you a fun fact about flutes, because this is all about a flute. Did you know that actually flutes have been around for many, many, many years? In fact, the oldest flutes found date back to between 43,000 and 53,000 years ago, found in Germany. And actually, there's one flute that was found in China that dates back to 900 BC. That is such a long time ago. Who knew that flutes have been making music for so many centuries? Okay, I hope that is a fun fact that you can go and impress your friends with. If you've grabbed your book, should we see what happens in chapter 4? The sun was glistening down onto fairy dales, and the fresh blossom was in full abundance. Blossom Heights was a magnificent tree of dusty pink petals and was the home to 2 blossom fairies, Pinch Pear and Applelena. Applelena was a calm and shy little fairy. Her complexion was a pale, almost as white as a fresh fallen blanket of snow on a winter's day. She had long, immaculate ebony hair. She loved to paint and draw, and did so perfectly. She was a very creative fairy. Applelena, however, had never mastered the art of reading and writing, and she found it particularly difficult to speak too. Applelena was as quiet as a mouse. She appeared to have no voice, so most of the time her long dark hair swallowed up her little face as she walked around the dales, head down, facing the ground. The other fairies didn't quite know how to include her in the daily activities or even in playtime. They found her a little unusual and assumed that Applelena preferred to be left alone. This left Applelena feeling sorrowful and empty, and sometimes quite lonely. Her little fairy feelings were aching and troubled. Pinch Pear Blossom, who lived with Applelena, was the only fairy who really knew and understood Applelena. At Willow Woods, teacher Tabitha Tulip was organising her little home as part of her plan to help Applelena blossom. She baked delicious chocolate chip cookies and carefully pressed juicy raspberries to make some juice. She set out an array of coloured paints, paper, and a few musical instruments ready for the arrival of Applelena. Later that day, Applelena left Blossom Heights, and in a flash, she flew across the dales to Willow Woods. Applelena arrived with her books nestled under her arm, and Tabitha welcomed Applelena with open arms. She was a caring fairy, so she made sure that the little apple blossom fairy felt comfortable. Applelena began to form a lovely friendship with the teacher. She calmly created beautiful patterns and shapes in her attempt to explain her inner feelings. Tabitha was determined to understand, so that she set out a plan. Dear Blossom Fairy, I'm going to teach you to read notes and create sounds and melodies. It is called music. You will see that creating music is just like allowing paint to flow into a canvas, which I know you love to do. The teacher said with such enthusiasm. Applelena Blossom lifted her head and briefly looked up at the teacher. Her beautiful angelic fairy face glowed with hope. Tabitha's heart warmed with emotion. They both eagerly started the lesson. The days passed and weeks did too. Fairy Dells couldn't but notice Applelena Blossom flutter away daily over to the willow woods, swinging her heavy books in her little apple green gingham bag below her, holding onto them very tightly. Fairy Dappundil, who lived next door to Tabitha, also noticed as she arrived daily. All of the inquisitive fairies in Fairy Dells whispered to each other and wondered how Applelena was progressing. On one particular day, whilst Strawberry was delivering some of her mouth-watering berry homemade jams to Dappundil in Willow Woods, she overheard a faint sound. As soon as Dappundil appeared at the door, Strawberry shared this with her, and in 1 second, the two curious fairies decided to creep over to Fairy Tabitha's tulips house, and their ears were wide open. As they sheepishly approached the little cobbled pathway, the two fairies stopped abruptly. They could hear the most beautiful sound floating out of Tabitha's house. They gasped, looked at one another with eyes as wide as owls' eyes. Their chins dropped as their mouths opened in disbelief. Magnificent, harmonious, soft sounds of flute swirled the air and surrounded Strawberry and Daffodil, lifting them up as if they were swaying and twirling through fluffy clouds of sweet candy floss. This was the most delicate sound of music that they had ever heard. Briskly, without waiting a moment more, they flew over to the little round window of Tabitha's house and glimpsed inside. Right there, before their eyes, was Applelena Blossom with an exceptional pearly silver flute gently cradled in her arms. There she stood, creating the most wonderful music with her tiny angelic fingers. Her eyes were lightly closed as her body swayed back and forth along with every note. Tabitha Tulip was right by her side, watching with immense joy and admiration. She was the proudest fairy teacher in Fairy Dales. Daffodil and Strawberry threw themselves into each other's arms, hugging each other tightly. Overwhelmed and bursting with excitement, they flew off into the air. They just couldn't wait to share this special moment with the rest of the fairies in Fairy Dales. They swooped straight down to the valley bell and pulled onto its ropes with all of their mighty weight and power. The bell chimed loudly, rippling echoes across the dales, and rapidly all of the little confused fairies gathered into the town square to hear the exciting news that Daffodil and Strawberry were waiting to deliver. Without a moment to take breaths, Daffodil began to speak as Strawberry added high-pitched squeals and excited little flutters of applause. In a flash, overwhelming emotion and pure elation took over Fairy Dales. The enthusiasm reached up to the top of the hill where Grandma Rosarine was tending to her rose bushes. She too gracefully made her way down to join the group of fairies, accompanied by all of the shimmering fireflies. All together, they promptly flew over to Tabitha Tulip's house in Willow Woods. Upon landing, they could hear the beautiful symphony that Applelena alone was creating. Every fairy wiggled and jiggled with fluttering wings as they energetically applauded. They wore the biggest smiles that fairy tales had ever seen. Applelena opened her eyes slowly, waking up from her trance and feeling a little confused. She could hear the cheers from the garden and decided to take a peek outside. She calmly pushed open the door and was soon faced with the most excited crowd of fairies ever. Holding her flute with both hands, she bent over and bowed shyly to her fellow fairy friends. The applause grew louder. Tabitha Tulip appeared behind the Blossom Fairy, guiding her out into the colourful, deliciously scented garden. "Go on, darling Applelena," she urged. "You have a wonderful gift, and the fairies would like you to share it with them. They have come to listen to the magical melodies that you alone are creating. Stand proud and shine like the brightest star in the sky." Applelena lifted her head and looked deeply into Tabitha Tulip's eyes for the very first time. She felt strength and courage. She carefully positioned her flute, stood up straight, lifted her chin, rolled back her shoulders, and as her eyelids slowly closed, she effortlessly began to sway once again, back and forth, side to side, with every delicate note. Her gift was truly magical. Applelena Blossom was a very special fairy. The end. Wow, music can do wonders, can't it? Book lovers, if you enjoyed our book today, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our videos, and I will see you again next time. Okay, book lovers, bye.